No, the breaking point for Liverpool FC, when enough was enough and something had to be done, was when the affected party was Liverpool FC. Hi, my name is Mike. Welcome to my vlog about football in general and Burnley FC in particular, a vlog that had disappeared for a month along with my voice. Well, another Premier League weekend has come and gone, another loss for Burnley. Clarets fall to a 2-0 defeat away at Newcastle, which leaves them with just 1 point from the 7 games so far this season. 2-0 is not an unexpected result given the two teams. The Clarets are a young side, in fact the youngest in the Premier League, and they are learning things as they go. They are learning the hard way. Vincent Kompany has basically dropped a lot of young players in at the deep end, deliberately so, and is seeing if they can sink or swim. I'm not actually against this at the moment. This is the hard way. This is how you gain experience. You can't fake that. You can't do that on a training ground. You have to get experience, and that is by playing games. It hasn't been helped by having an incredibly tough set of opening fixtures, which puts more pressure on tomorrow's game at Luton. But we'll see. Whereas Newcastle, that is what is possible when you get in a manager who can organise, who has tactics, who has learned on the job, and has £400 million of not Saudi government money. I thought Eddie Howe's comments last week were very good when he was talking about the unfortunate cutting down of the sycamore tree at the Sycamore Gap near Hadrian's Wall. At least we know where the line is now for Eddie. People chopping down trees with a saw is unacceptable. People chopping up journalists with a saw is merely his boss. But the main topic of conversation amongst Clarets fans is still in goal. James Trafford is struggling, and there is a groundswell of opinion that Aaron Muric should be put in between the sticks. Funnily enough, from most of the same people who were saying Aaron Muric was a complete liability around about this time last year. Really do want to support James Trafford. I understand why he's playing. I think he's been fine. I think he's been no better than fine, but I think he's been fine. What I'm worrying about is we're getting a little bit of a Joe Hart situation here. Joe Hart was not a problem, or was not the root cause of the problems in the Europa League season when he was covering for not only an injured Nick Pope but also an injured Tom Heaton. But the defence and him never really gelled, and Clarets were in big trouble. Not because of Joe Hart, but he seemed to be the lightning rod who attracted the attention. And I'm beginning to get the feeling that for a lot of people, James Trafford is the same. He is the lightning rod for the frustrations when it's not actually his fault. And I'd hate to be in Vincent Kompany's shoes because he has a very expensive player there, a young player who is going to learn on the job, a young player who I think is going to be very good in the future. But we have to go through those growing pains. Now, we don't know obviously the conversations behind the scenes on this one, but when the club's philosophy is to develop players in order to sell them, then investing this amount of money in James Trafford and then sitting him on the bench is a bad idea. It is bad for business, it's bad for his development. I feel for the guy. I feel for Aaron Muric. I've said before in previous vlogs, I thought that in terms of improving the squad, goalkeeper was not necessarily a position that needed improvement. But we are where we are. Trafford is the nominated number one. Will he play against Luton? Well, probably. I don't see any reason why he should be dropped. And for people turning around saying Muric's stats so far have been spectacular, well, it's easy to get like a 97% completed pass rate when you're playing Salford City. It's a little bit more difficult when you're playing Newcastle or Manchester United. But to be honest, that's not really the point of the vlog this week. Sometimes I step away from Burnley specifically, and this week we have had yet another VAR controversy, yet another VAR screw-up, and that's been the talking point, as it usually is. This weekend's screw-up involved wrongly chalking off a Luis Diaz goal for Liverpool. Communication error, apparently, involving Darren England, who, I think, weirdly enough, was the guy who was so hyper-accurate in chalking off Sanderberg's goal against Forest. Anyway, despite the spinning wheel of VAR misfortune landing on the boys from Anfield, at least their club and their fans didn't overreact. Who am I kidding? It's self-righteous FC, a club and supporters who can't see a storm off in the distance without insisting that they walk through it with their head held high. Okay, so you can't judge a club by its supporters, but the reason stereotypes become stereotypes is if they have a kernel of truth in them. Liverpool themselves as a football club put out a public statement, but of course Liverpool being Liverpool, it wasn't about them being on the wrong end of things for once. It was purely for the good of the game. This is vital for the reliability of future decision making as it applies to all clubs, with learnings being used to make improvements to processes in order to ensure this kind of situation cannot occur again. All clubs. Interesting where the breaking point was. Not when Berg had a goal chalked off in a vital game near the bottom of the table, or Anthony Gordon had a similar one allowed. Nor when Onana of Manchester United wiped out 2 Wolves players. No, the breaking point for Liverpool FC, when enough was enough and something had to be done, was when the affected party was Liverpool FC. You can imagine the rallying cry in the club WhatsApp groups. Enough is enough, lads. We cannot take this anymore. We must march on as one upon the headquarters of the Professional Game Match Officials Limited. After all, did Cilla not die in vain for this? We fully accept the pressures that match officials work under, but those pressures are supposed to be alleviated, not exacerbated, by the existence and implementation of VAR. Quite right, not a lot to disagree with there. Those officials do work under incredible pressure on the pitch, generally from this guy. It is therefore unsatisfactory that sufficient time was not afforded to allow the correct decision to be made, and that there was no subsequent intervention. That's a weird one. Here's Jurgen Klopp in 2020 talking about delays in a Champions League game. It just took too long, I think, in the end. I didn't see it back. The decisions were right, but it was so difficult. It took 3 or 4 minutes, and it was cold for the boys. The theme he had warmed to. As just a year earlier, we're in December and coming into January. Players standing around that long is not good. So the amount of time afforded to the VAR to check is depending on the weather. I've seen people say that VAR checks should be limited to a certain amount of time, but to paraphrase something that's true in project management, you can have a decision quickly or you can have a decision correctly. Pick one. VAR is an absolute mess, and I say that as a supporter of VAR on its introduction, but I base that on the idea that it was implemented in a similar way to rugby, where the Iron Sky worked with the on-pitch officials. Football is the only sport where VAR sits in judgment of the referee and not the players. Isn't the phrase clear and obvious error such a weird one? Shouldn't the VAR be there to assist? Shouldn't the on-pitch ref be able to ask the question, is there a reason to rule out the goal? Or, I think there might have been a handball in the build-up, can you check for me? Wouldn't that be a sensible way of doing it? But here is an uncomfortable truth. VAR as implemented in this country was set up to fail, and pretty much deliberately at that. Ex-referee Mike Dean let the cat out of the bag a few weeks ago. First up, he said that he was against VAR because he had ref for 19 years and didn't see why he needed the assistance. It takes a special kind of ego to look at VAR as implemented in cricket or tennis or rugby and say, well, I don't need that kind of help. And then when he said he didn't overturn a call because he wanted to protect his colleague. I didn't want to send him up because he is a mate as well as a referee. And I think I didn't want to send him up because I didn't want any more grief than he already had. The most senior referee, I almost said respected there, but Mike Dean, coming out and saying that he deliberately blew a call in order to save his mate from criticism, which he was getting anyway. And Mike Dean was one of those who was involved in setting up VAR. So no wonder it fails so badly. He and others set VAR up to fail and then handed over the flaming bin bag to the rest of the referees in order to settle back into a nice, comfy, well-paying Sky Sports chair, where they then shit all over their colleagues on public television. And Howard Webb goes on and stands next to the charisma vacuum that is Michael Owen and throws the remains under a bus. The Nathan Ake offside goal against Fulham actually was allowed and was justifiable under the offside law as it stood. It failed the eye test, but there was a reasonable justification for allowing that goal to stand. The referee and the linesman on the pitch allowed it, the VAR allowed it. But because the media screamed about it, the chief of PGMOL went on to Sky Sports and threw them under the bus. Who would work with these people? If I do something in my job and then I double check it with my equally qualified colleague who confirms that I am correct, and then, because people have a vested interest in being wrong, my boss went out and publicly told everyone that I was wrong, I'd be handing in my resignation the next morning. And that resignation wouldn't say, sorry for my mistake. It would say, get stuffed, I am not working for someone like you. I do have sympathy for Liverpool and the other clubs and the fans. I understand why VAR is there. The goal difference, or allowing a goal, is the difference between finishing 11th or 12th or 6th or 7th. And those league places, which can come down to conceding or scoring a goal, are worth £2.5 million per place. So there is a business rationale to get it right. But VAR is not only set up to fail by the officials who are supposed to be doing it, it's used as a stick in which to feed the 24-hour Sky Sports post-match controversy industrial complex. Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher have absolutely no interest in VAR being operated properly, in VAR coming to the correct decision. They either want it to be wrong, so they can moan and fill another 6 hours of content, or they want it to be right, but crucially, they just want it to be right for their team. Meanwhile, us fans are stuck in a stadium wondering what is going on, or bickering online in highly partisan Twitter arguments as yet again the focus, the actual game of football with all its ups and downs, its greatnesses, and yes, its flaws and its mistakes, which are a massive part of the appeal, is forgotten in order to chase TV eyeballs. But then, since when did football ever give a shit about fans? VAR is a mess, but VAR could be set up in such a way and changed in such a way very, very easily that it actually begins to work. There are a number of ways that it could be done. The VAR officials should not be in judgment of the on-pitch officials. They should be working as a team together. The on-pitch officials should be able to ask questions. Those conversations should follow a process, should follow a pattern, should follow a plan. And that process should be visible, or indeed audible, either in the ground, which would be a little bit tricky, or at least to the paying viewer. There is a secrecy to the VAR process. It is a black box. We do not know the rationale and the thought process that is actually coming to each decision. You hear it in rugby, you hear it in cricket, but because referees have such huge egos, they do not want light being shed on their decision-making process. And those decisions can still be wrong, and that's okay, because football is largely a game of subjectivity and subjective rules. Offside is not necessarily binary. There is a subjective element once you get so far into it. Is a player interfering with play with line of sight of the goalkeeper or not? That is a subjective decision. And as long as VAR is open about how it operates, then the second way of getting it fixed is when Sky Sports and their pundits, who are deliberately ignorant of the rules in order to get eyeballs, in order to put their own club biases front and centre. If VAR is open, then I fully support them the next time that Gary Neville or Rio Ferdinand or whoever tells them that they are wrong, to simply issue a short statement, which is shut up and piss off. That is as simple as it needs to be. And if Howard Webb wants to sit in a comfy Sky Sports chair as the head of PGMOL, then either he needs to turn round and whenever his colleagues are criticised, to defend them, or to resign immediately and become yet another pundit who's kicking them in the teeth. Pick one, Howard. Pick one, for God's sake. TV is running football to a huge degree. It is altering the finances, it is altering the times, it is altering the competitive balance, and now it is determining what the decisions are on the pitch. It's gone too far and it needs to stop. If you've got any comments about this video, please feel free to leave them down below and I will respond where I can. If you liked it, click the like button. And if you like what I do, have a look around the rest of the channel and click subscribe to be notified when I produce new content.